This video is part 4 of the Wildflowers of KwaZulu-Natal series. From the Bignoniaceae we have the Mopani pomegranate, Ragosum zambaziacum. It flowers with these really bright yellow flowers. Usually when there are very few leaves on the tree, it's dropped all its leaves. Typical sort of medium-sized tree or small tree in the bushveld area. Here we have from the Cactaceae, Ripsalis baxifera, which is called the mistletoe cactus. It is the only cactus species known in Africa, and it is an epiphytic cactus. In other words, it grows in or on trees. From the Vitaceae we have a number of wild grape species. This is Roycissus tridentata. You can see the tooth-like leaf tips there, or margin. Then there's Roycissus digitata, which has finger-like leaves. It's similar to Roycissus revoili, which also occurs in the bushveld area. This is Roycissus tomentosa, which has a sort of triangular poplar-shaped leaf, and like all grapes species, it has the tendrils for climbing and produces a fleshy fruit. From the Rubiaceae we have the Brazilian white-eye, Richardia brasiliensis. It's a small plant, a very small plant with tiny flowers, and it's quite easy to overlook. From the Euphorbiaceae we have the castor oil bean. It's a common weed in disturbed areas. Ricinus communis. Ricinus refers to ricin, which is the toxic compound that is found in the beans of this plant. Highly toxic. From the Apocynaceae or oleander family we have the candlefine, Rheocrosia torullosa, and it has these waxy candle-like flowers, which you can see in front there. It's obviously a climber. Ravenna humilis, the bloodberry, occurs in kind of semi-shade areas. It's formerly of the Phytolaccaceae, which would be called the pokeweed family. It's now placed in the family Petiveriaceae. From the mustard family we have Roripa nudiascula, the yellow cress, one of the yellow cresses. From the Rubiaceae or Gardenia family we have September bells, Rothmania globosa. You can see the flowers in the inset, really pretty and highly fragrant flowers, and then of course the fruit in the center of the image there. From the Acanthaceae, another white flowered specimen, the felt violet, Ruellia cordata. Cordata refers to the leaf shape. From the Acanthaceae once again we have Ratia ovata. It's one of my favorite plants of the bushveld, definitely in KwaZulu-Natal. It has these sort of medium-sized bushes with these really striking and quite large flowers growing on them. Ratia ovata. It's a wonderful bush plant. In the salt flats, typically around the St. Lucia area and all along our coastline actually, is Salicornia mayeriana, excuse me. It's a salt marsh plant and it's typically found quite widespread in salt marsh areas. It is from the Amaranthaceae and apparently the leaves are edible. From the Asparagaceae, the mother-in-law's tongue, Sansevieria metallica, or snake plant. There are a number of species. This is obviously one of many. They've got leathery leaves, a sharp tip at the end of the leaf, which is where the mother-in-law's tongue name comes from, and of course the leaves can be used for making cordage as well. Apparently the rhizomes can be dug up for moisture. I have actually tried this and it's just not worth the effort. This is a really interesting plant, Rapunzel plant, Sarcostema viminale of the Apocynaceae or oleander family. It grows in a scraggly mess over trees, usually acacias, um, especially lower growing acacias, and it has these really distinctive flowers typical of the family, and green stems. um, I think they call them phylloclades, which can actually photosynthesize. From the Asteraceae, we have the pincushion flower, Scabiosa columbaria. It's a very common flower that's found in many parts of, particularly of eastern South Africa, right from the north down to the coastline. And it's got these really attractive little flowers, Scabiosa columbaria. From the Fabaceae, we have this really nice little dwarf tree called the dwarf blue bean, Scotia capitata. You can see the winged rachis of the compound leaf, and then the little leaflets there. Very, very striking red flowers that attract birds and fruit-eating bats. This is a really favorite plant of mine and not easy to find, but it occurs in the Isimangaliso area, particularly in the False Bay area. I've seen them. Sclerochitin apiculatus, or blue lips. Really, really attractive little plant from the Acanthaceae. From the Asteraceae, once again, a Senecio species, of which there are many hundreds. This is Senecio latifolius, or Dan's cabbage. This particular specimen's got very long ray florets, and they're quite far separated, and they're few in number. The Port Royal Senna italica from the Fabaceae, it has these flattened sort of curved pods, and the typical flowers of the Senna species. Then the winged seed sesame, Sesamum mulatum, is very similar to the wild foxglove, Ceratotheca triloba. In fact, they are both from the Pedaliaceae, or wild sesame family. The seeds apparently of these pods are edible. Then from the Malvaceae, the flannelweed, Cider cordifolia. Cordifolia, once again referring to heart-shaped leaves, and that often refers to the base of the leaf, which kind of forms the base of a heart shape. From the Smilaceae, we have Smilax anceps, the catbrier from the catbrier family. Catbriers are very common in the northern hemisphere, particularly North America, and they have typically 3 to 5 large, deeply incised veins on the leaf that come from the base, and the main veins basically, and they often have hooked thorns along the stem as well, which help with climbing. It's a scrambling or climbing plant. Smilax anceps is this particular species. From the Solanaceae, we have the Brazilian nightshade, Solanum seaforthianum. There are a lot of Solanum species. This particular one was seen growing sort of as a creeper. From the Malpighiaceae, we have the little moth plant, Sphedamnocarpus pruriens, one of my favorite plants. It occurs in KwaZulu-Natal, growing over bushes. It's a creeper, and it has these very distinctive flowers and even more distinctive fruits which resemble a moth, hence the name, little moth plant. A really delightful little plant. From the Apocynaceae, we have the carrion flower, Stapelia gigantea. These have very large flowers that smell like carrion, or dead meat basically. So obviously it attracts flies for pollination, and it is a succulent. You can see, and typically it's actually quite typical of a lot of Apocynaceae or Oleander family members. It is toxic, and you can see the pods there. In the center there's the double pod, which is typical for the family, and the pods are split open in the picture on the left center, and you can see the fluffy the seeds attached to fluff that helps them to disperse. The Strelitziaceae, there are a lot of Strelitzia species. This is Strelitzia reginae. It's a small Strelitzia. It is often used in cut plant industry for decorations or flower arrangements. What's characteristic of these plants is the flower, of course. It's got this keel-like base at the flower in green, and then it has these petal-like extensions which are orange in color to attract birds, and then that blue extension in the foreground there. Okay, the blue part actually is a perch for birds. So when the bird comes to dip its beak into the flower to get nectar, it stands on that perch, and the blue perch kind of splits open lengthwise as the bird stands, and pollen from a whole lot of pollinia basically gets spread over the bird's feet as it stands on this structure, and then the bird can fly off and go and pollinate another Strelitzia. The Strelitzias are sometimes called wild bananas. Large Strelitzias, like Strelitzia nicolai, are much bigger in stature. This is a typically small shrub-like plant rather than a tree. From the Orobanchaceae is the elegant witchweed, Striga elegans. This is a parasitic plant, a hemiparasitic plant, which grows on from the base of rhizomes of grass plants. So it's parasitic on grasses, and so you would typically find it underneath tall grasses that are growing in an open grassland or a savanna. From the Loranthaceae, this is an example of a parasitic plant called Tapenanthus crassianus. It has kind of orangey flowers. There are other species. There's one called Tapenanthus rubomarginatus, which has red flowers, and it's called lighted matches because the flowers resemble matches with the match head at the top. These are pollinated by sunbirds. From the Asteraceae, again, a common dandelion, Taraxacum officinale. The leaves are apparently edible, and I think they actually are used in salads. From the Fabaceae, the pioneer Tephrosia polystachya. It has very characteristic compound leaves, which are quite narrow in gauge and sort of come out at right angles from the stem, with the 3 leaflets at the tip, typical of this plant. So it's got quite a characteristic shape for Tephrosia. Most Tephrosias are actually a pinkish color or reddish color. This one's a white. From the Malvaceae is the tulip tree, Thespesia cutiloba. This tree is often mistaken for another tree that occurs in a similar habitat, which is Hibiscus tiliaceus, which is the sea hibiscus. They tend to occur along the edges of mangroves. This particular specimen was on the edge, basically, or is growing on the edge of the False Bay area, so right next to the salty water, the brackish water. The Acanthaceae again, this is one of the Thunbergia species, Thunbergia dregiana, related to the black-eyed Susans. Note that there are 2 different black-eyed Susan species. One is the Thunbergia, and the other one escapes me for the moment. From the Asphodelaceae, which is the aloe family, we have Trachyandra aspirata. It has these distinctive flowers with a dark sort of nerve running through the center of the petals. Trachyandra aspirata. The punctureweed from Zygophyllaceae, Tribulus terrestris, has its name because it produces these kind of woody fruit pods, which I don't even want to call it a pod, but fruits which have sharp thorns or spines which enable it to be dispersed. Basically, the thorns get stuck in the feet of animals or in the hooves of herbivores and then get trampled around. It's quite a pest. If it grows in an open disturbed area, it leaves all of these thorns, and it's very painful for animals and for human beings. Tribulus terrestris. From the Iridaceae, the blazing star flame Freesia, Tritonia distica. Very, very pretty flower, and typical of grasslands, especially moist grasslands. Virginia altissima is the tall white squirrel. There are other squirrel species. It also was, I think, formerly of the genus Dromia, but it emerges early in the year and usually produces this really tall stem, and then the rest of the year you have just this tiny base of leaves. From the Hyacinthaceae. From the Urticaceae, which is the nettle family, we have a stinging nettle, Urtica species. The most common one is Urtica dioica. You can see the stinging hairs or trichomes on the stem of the plant, and they'll also be beneath the leaves. These are highly nutritious plants, hence the need, I guess, for protection from plant herbivores, or from herbivores feeding on the plant. The stinging hairs are called urticaceous hairs, and in the same way that caterpillar hairs are called urticaceous hairs because they behave like stinging nettles. From the Verbenaceae, we have the Brazilian vervain, Verbena bonariensis, which has these little delicate white flowers. From the Asteraceae, the common Vernonia, not to be confused with verbenas, and this is Vernonia fastigiata. There are a number of species, of course, and they typically have purple flowers. From the Fabaceae, we have a cowpea, Vigna unguiculata. There are a number of cowpea species, and they typically produce a pea-like pod, and the seeds are quite distinctive, often with a black mark. Also a cowpea species, the hairy pod cowpea, Vigna luteola, with yellow flowers and trifoliate leaves, of course, as are all the other species. This is Cape mistletoe, Viscum verrucosum. It's also called fool end. It has these sticky fruits that are produced, and the fruits are spread by birds, and basically they stick to the feet and the bird, and the beak of the bird, and the bird will rub them off on some other tree as it flies around, and thus transfer the plant disperse the plant from one tree to another. It's from the Santalaceae, the sandalwood family. Sandalwood trees, in fact, are hemiparasites, just as this is a parasite, hemiparasite. The sleepy morning plant, Walteria indica, is a weed. It has these yellow flowers. From the Malvaceae, it has these yellow flowers kind of in a cluster at the axils of the very large leaves. From the Velociaceae, we have Xerophyta retinovis, obviously one of the more well-known geophytic plants that occurs in the southern African bush. It has these stumps which are often fairly long, hence the name blackstick lily. These burn obviously during the fires, and they have a very dark black color, almost like a burnt stump, and then the strap-like leaves. It's one of the resurrection plants because the leaves will often dry out during the dry season, but after the first rains it immediately becomes green again. It has these distinctive flowers, and the flowers have a very, very nice vanilla-like scent, but you have to be very close up to smell it. So you've got to really stick your nose into these flowers, but it's a wonderful plant. Also called Bobbejaanstaart or Aapstaart, and that refers to the fact that it looks like a monkey tail or a baboon tail. A large sour plum, Zaminia caffra. It is edible, and it is incredibly sour, which is typical of a lot of fruits that occur in the African bush. And this is because animals like baboons that disperses seeds like sour fruit. So it's kind of like in the same way that bears like sweet fruit in the northern hemisphere. You have a lot of sweet fruits available, sweet berries that the bears will feed on. Likewise, in the African bushveld, you have chacma baboons and other monkeys like vervets that might really relish this sort of more sour fruit and therefore be likely to spread it. It has a high vitamin C content, and obviously the sour taste is an indicator of that. From the Asteraceae, a weed, Zinnia peruviana, typically found along roadsides and in disturbed areas, old gardens, etc. Um, and yeah, obviously an introduced pioneer plant which has become a weed. From the Fabaceae, we have Zornia milniana, commonly called the Zornia, and it has yellow flowers and a typical flower of the Fabaceae with pods. And finally, we have the Rubiaceae, the Gardenia family. This is a wild pomegranate, Burkelia babylina. It's not a common tree, but it's a very interesting tree to find. I've found them only a few times in the bushveld and always been delighted to find them. So a wild pomegranate, Burkelia babylina. Not to be confused with the Mopani pomegranate, which was featured earlier, which is Rhagosum zambaziacum. So just a similar common name, but a completely different species. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content.